The morning sun rose over the historic coastal city of Charleston, South Carolina, casting a brilliant, golden glow across the manicured gardens of the grand waterfront estate. Inside the massive, pristine ballroom, the air was filled with the delicate scent of hundreds of white roses and the soft, ambient melodies of a live string quartet playing in the corner. Every detail of the space had been meticulously arranged to project an aura of absolute luxury and high society perfection. From the towering crystal chandeliers reflecting the morning light to the tables draped in expensive silk linens. Wealthy guests, dressed in tailored suits and exquisite designer gowns, drifted through the room, their laughter light and their smiles perfectly rehearsed for the photographers moving discreetly through the crowd. The towering arched windows stretched from the polished hardwood floor to the high ceiling, allowing only the most flattering natural light to illuminate this gathering of the city's most influential figures. It was an environment where appearance was treated as the ultimate currency, and where every individual sought to outshine the next in a silent competition of status and prestige. Amidst this sea of opulence stood Hannah Davis, a 52-year-old woman whose entire life had been defined by her relentless pursuit of social standing and unblemished elegance. Her sharp, sophisticated features were framed by perfectly styled blonde hair, swept up into an intricate, flawless updo, and her deep blue silk gown whispered against the floor as she moved with practiced grace. Today was supposed to be the crowning achievement of her social ambitions. The afternoon she would officially announce her engagement to a prominent and wealthy real estate developer from the region. For decades, Hannah had carefully constructed a shield of wealth and perfection, believing that true human worth was measured solely by the labels on one's clothes and the influence of one's social circle. As she greeted the arriving dignitaries and local business leaders, her eyes constantly scanned the room, ensuring that everything met her impossibly high standards, and that no flaw could mar the perfect image she had crafted for the world to see. In a quiet corner of the same grand ballroom, far away from the bustling center of attention, stood a young woman who offered a stark contrast to the surrounding vanity. Lily Davis, a 26-year-old employee at one of the city's largest corporate enterprises, stood quietly near a pillar, her delicate features radiating a calm and gentle composure. She wore a simple, unadorned beige dress that she had chosen for its modesty, her dark brown hair tied back into a neat, uncomplicated bun, without a single piece of expensive jewelry or dramatic makeup to draw attention. Lily had worked diligently at the corporation for a little over 1 year, earning a reputation among her immediate peers for her silent efficiency, her kindness, and her absolute refusal to participate in corporate politics or gossip. She rarely spoke about her personal life or her background to her colleagues, preferring to let her dedicated work speak for itself, while she navigated the high-pressure environment of the city with quiet dignity. The only reason Lily had agreed to attend this lavish event was because of the older woman standing beside her, holding her hand with a mixture of awe and gentle trepidation. This was Clara, Lily's 74-year-old mother, a petite woman with silver hair neatly pinned back and a face beautifully lined with the deep tracks of a long, hard-working life. Clara was dressed in a simple floral cotton dress that had seen many years of careful washing, covered by a plain brown wool coat that looked entirely out of place among the silks and satins of Charleston's elite. Her hands, rough and heavily calloused from decades of endless labor, trembled slightly as she looked around the magnificent room, feeling the overwhelming weight of a world she had never known. Clara had initially refused her daughter's invitation, insisting that an old woman from the working-class valleys had no business in such a palace. But Lily had insisted, wanting her mother to finally experience a moment of beauty and inclusion. For decades, Clara had worked without a single day of rest as a humble neighborhood seamstress, mending clothes and sewing garments for meager wages to ensure her family survived. She had sacrificed her own youth, her health, and every comfort imaginable to provide Lily with an education and a chance at a better life, never once complaining about the heavy burdens she carried. Lily cherished her mother above all else, viewing those calloused hands not as a sign of poverty, but as a sacred testament to unconditional love and profound inner strength. As they stood together in the grand ballroom, Lily kept a protective arm around her mother's shoulders, whispering gentle words of encouragement to soothe her nerves and assure her that she belonged there just as much as anyone else. Clara offered her daughter a small, tranquil smile, her clear eyes reflecting a deep and abiding goodness that no amount of material wealth could ever hope to replicate. As the morning progressed, the ballroom grew increasingly crowded with affluent guests who sipped expensive champagne and discussed their latest business ventures and luxury acquisitions. Many of the attendees glanced briefly at Clara, their eyes lingering on her faded brown coat and simple cotton dress, before quickly looking away with expressions of subtle disdain or polite indifference. They treated the elderly woman as if she were completely invisible, an uncomfortable blemish on the perfect tapestry of their high society gathering that was best ignored. Clara felt the weight of their silent judgment, her shoulders tightening slightly as she instinctively tried to make herself smaller against the grand pillar, wishing she had stayed in her quiet home. Yet, she maintained her gentle demeanor, refusing to let the cold atmosphere sour the joy she felt in seeing her daughter stand proudly in such a magnificent place. The fragile peace of their quiet corner was abruptly shattered when Hannah Davis marched across the ballroom, her sharp eyes locking onto Clara's rustic attire with immediate disapproval. Hannah had been walking with a group of influential socialites, boasting about the exclusivity of her engagement party, when the sight of the elderly woman in the simple floral dress offended her sense of perfection. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze sweeping up and down Clara's appearance with a cold, analytical scrutiny that radiated pure arrogance. A strange, mocking smile formed on Hannah's face as she turned to her companions, initially speaking in a low, conspiratorial whisper that quickly grew louder, ensuring her words would carry across the immediate area. She could not tolerate the presence of someone who looked so ordinary at an event she had spent months planning to showcase absolute luxury. With a sharp, dismissive wave of her hand, Hannah spoke the words that would instantly alter the entire atmosphere of the morning, her voice cutting through the soft music of the string quartet. She remarked loudly about the cheap quality of Clara's clothes, wondering aloud how someone could show such a complete lack of respect for an elegant event by dressing in rags. A few of the nearby guests let out cruel, hushed chuckles, while others quickly turned away, pretending not to hear the blatant humiliation unfolding before them, but doing nothing to stop it. Clara immediately lowered her eyes to the polished floor, her cheeks flushing with a deep, painful warmth as she tightened her grip on her daughter's hand, her heart aching not for herself, but for the embarrassment she believed she was causing. Lily stood completely frozen, her heart racing with a mixture of profound shock and rising sorrow, unable to comprehend how anyone could harbor such cruelty toward a gentle stranger. The silence that followed Hannah's cruel statement seemed to stretch on for an eternity, hanging heavily over the glittering crowd like a suffocating blanket. Lily looked at her mother's bowed head, seeing the way Clara's small frame seemed to shrink under the weight of the public mockery, and a wave of fierce protectiveness washed over her. She did not feel shame for her mother's appearance. Rather, she felt a profound, burning sorrow for the spiritual poverty of the wealthy people surrounding them, who valued fabric over human dignity. Lily gently squeezed Clara's trembling hand, her voice steady and filled with a quiet, unshakable pride as she leaned down to comfort the woman who had given her everything. She realized that the luxury of this ballroom was nothing more than a hollow theater, a fragile illusion built on vanity and maintained by the cruel exclusion of anyone deemed unworthy of its artificial standards. Sensing her mother's deep discomfort, Lily leaned in close and whispered softly into Clara's ear, suggesting that they leave the grand estate immediately and return to the peace of their own home. She assured her mother that they did not need the validation of this heartless crowd, and that their bond was far more valuable than any social gathering or corporate event. But Clara, despite the tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, looked up at her daughter with an expression of pure, selfless love and shook her head. In a barely audible whisper, the elderly woman told Lily not to ruin her own day or her professional relationships because of an old woman's hurt feelings, pleading with her to stay and remain strong. Even in the face of intense personal humiliation, Clara's primary concern was entirely for her daughter's future, demonstrating a depth of love that none of the wealthy guests could begin to understand. It was at that exact, agonizing moment that the rhythmic sound of footsteps across the polished hardwood floor suddenly came to an absolute halt. A tall, distinguished gentleman, who had been walking through the center of the hall, paused mid-stride, his sharp attention entirely captured by the cruel display near the pillar. This man was Michael Adams, the 48-year-old founder and chief executive officer of the massive corporate conglomerate where Lily had been working for the past year. Michael was a figure of immense influence and wealth, yet he carried himself with a serious, observant demeanor that set him apart from the boastful socialites of the city. He was dressed in an immaculate, finely tailored white suit that accentuated his commanding presence, and his dark eyes flashed with a sudden, intense seriousness as he witnessed the interaction between Hannah and the elderly woman. Michael had attended the engagement party strictly out of a sense of obligation to an old childhood friend, but he had spent most of the morning observing the behavior of the guests with a detached, quiet skepticism. He had watched people flatter each other for their wealth and ignore the serving staff, but the open cruelty displayed by Hannah was something he could not ignore. Instead of turning away like the others, Michael began walking directly toward the quiet corner, his face an unreadable mask of absolute calm as he bypassed the whispers of the crowd. As he reached the small group, he bypassed Hannah entirely, stepping forward to stand directly in front of Clara, his posture radiating a profound, unexpected reverence. He bowed his head slightly in an act of old-world courtesy, offering the elderly woman a genuine, polite greeting that caught everyone nearby completely off guard. Clara, surprised by the sudden attention of such an imposing and wealthy-looking gentleman, looked up and responded to his greeting with her characteristic simplicity, her voice trembling slightly, but remaining entirely polite. Despite the immense discomfort and humiliation she had just endured, a faint, resilient smile appeared on her face, a testament to her lifelong habit of offering kindness to everyone she encountered. Michael observed that smile closely, noting the way it reached her tired eyes and the absolute lack of malice or anger in her expression, despite the cruelty she had faced. This simple act of grace in the face of mockery struck a powerful chord deep within his soul, capturing his full attention and awakening a storm of personal memories that he had kept buried for many decades. He saw in Clara something that was completely absent from the rest of the crowded ballroom, a rare, genuine purity of spirit. A few minutes later, as the crowd's attention began to drift back to their champagne and small talk, Michael quietly stepped away and found Lily standing alone by one of the massive arched windows. The young woman was staring out at the distant ocean, her shoulders tense as she tried to compose herself and hide the deep sadness that threatened to overwhelm her. Michael approached her discreetly, his voice low and respectful, as he inquired if she and her mother were truly doing well after what had transpired. Lily turned to face her employer, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears that betrayed her calm exterior, though she tried to offer a polite, professional nod. She looked at Michael, recognizing him as the powerful head of the company, but she chose to speak from her heart rather than out of corporate fear, determined to defend the honor of the woman who raised her. With a gentle but unyielding firmness, Lily looked into Michael's eyes and explained that while her mother had never possessed material wealth or luxury, she had never once allowed her children to grow up without a deep, abiding respect for themselves and others. She stated that her mother's worth could never be measured by the price of her clothes, because her true wealth lay in her honesty, her kindness, and her decades of quiet sacrifice. Michael remained completely silent as he listened to Lily's words, the young woman's sentence striking him with the force of a physical blow as it echoed through the chambers of his mind. That single, profound statement about a mother's love and dignity unlocked a floodgate of ancient memories from his own youth, transporting him back to a time long before he became the wealthiest man in the city. Many years before Michael Adams built his vast corporate empire and became a legendary figure in the business world, he had been a young boy growing up in a starkly different environment. His own mother had been a tireless, impoverished seamstress, who spent her days and nights huddled over a squeaking sewing machine, working by the dim light of a single bulb to earn enough pennies for their next meal. Michael vividly remembered the ache in his mother's back, the permanent stains of ink and grease on her fingers, and the worn, faded dresses she wore year after year without a single complaint. He remembered the painful day when he was a teenager, and his mother had been treated with the exact same cold disdain at a school function, judged entirely by her threadbare coat rather than the magnificent depth of her character. That memory had fueled his ambition for decades, but it had also left a permanent scar, making him fiercely protective of the quiet, hard-working souls who kept the world moving without ever receiving praise. Standing by the window in the luxurious Charleston ballroom, Michael looked back toward Clara, seeing the exact same quiet dignity in her posture that his own mother had possessed until her final breath. He realized with absolute clarity that the universe had brought him to this event not to celebrate a hollow engagement, but to stand up for the timeless values that true success was built upon. In that very instant, a powerful and unyielding decision crystallized within his mind, a determination to use his immense influence to shatter the arrogant illusions of the wealthy crowd. Without saying another word to Lily, Michael turned and walked purposefully back toward the center of the grand hall, his stride filled with a commanding authority that naturally caused the surrounding conversations to falter. He stepped up onto the small raised dais where the musicians had been playing, reached out, and firmly took the microphone from its stand. He politely requested a single minute of everyone's time, his deep, resonant voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system and instantly capturing the attention of every single person in the ballroom. The sudden announcement caused a wave of curiosity to ripple through the guests, and Hannah Davis immediately turned toward the stage, a wide, triumphant smile spreading across her face. She falsely assumed that Michael, as the most prominent businessman in attendance, was stepping forward to deliver a grand, public compliment regarding the elegance of her engagement party or her family's social standing. The rest of the guests quickly gathered closer to the stage, holding their crystal glasses and waiting expectantly for the wealthy tycoon to deliver what they imagined would be a standard speech of high society praise and mutual admiration. But as Michael looked out over the sea of expensive silk dresses and tailored tuxedos, his expression remained entirely serious, his dark eyes sweeping over the crowd with a piercing, analytical gaze that made several people shift uncomfortably. He began his speech not with congratulations, but with a profound, unexpected question, asking the audience what truly made an individual important or worthy of honor in this life. The entire ballroom fell into a sudden, absolute quiet, the guests looking at one another in confusion as the typical atmosphere of celebratory vanity vanished, replaced by an intense, uncertain tension. A few of the more arrogant socialites near the front spoke up in hushed, confident tones, suggesting that wealth, lineage, and a polished public appearance were the obvious markers of a person's true significance in the world. Michael offered them a cold, fleeting smile, shaking his head slowly as he prepared to deliver a truth that would completely upend the social hierarchy of the room. He raised his hand and pointed across the silent, crowded ballroom, his finger directing the attention of every single guest away from the stage and straight toward the quiet corner near the pillar. He asked the audience what they would think if he told them that on this very morning, the most genuinely respectable and honorable person in the entire room was precisely the woman whom almost everyone had chosen to ignore or mock. A collective gasp of surprise rippled through the crowd as hundreds of heads turned simultaneously to look at Clara, who was still standing quietly in her faded brown coat and simple floral dress. Lily looked at her employer in complete bewilderment, her heart pounding as she tried to understand why the powerful corporate leader was drawing the entire room's attention to her humble mother. Michael did not leave them in suspense for long. He stepped down from the raised platform, carrying the microphone with him as he began walking slowly and deliberately through the parting crowd, straight toward Clara. The wealthy guests stepped aside with hurried movements, clearing a wide path for him as if they were witnessing a profound shift in the tide of the entire event. As he approached the elderly woman, his demeanor was entirely devoid of the cold corporate authority he was famous for, replaced instead by a deep, visible humility that stunned his employees. He stood before Clara, looked gently into her weathered face, and asked her in a voice that was broadcast clearly to every corner of the room to tell him about the work she had done throughout her long life. Clara looked around at the hundreds of eyes staring at her, swallowed hard, and began to speak with her characteristic honesty, her voice trembling but carrying a strange, undeniable power. With absolute simplicity and a complete lack of pretense, Clara explained to the silent audience that she had spent over 40 years working as a neighborhood seamstress in a small town far away from the glitz of the city. She spoke of how she had sat at her sewing machine for 14 hours a day, mending torn trousers, sewing school uniforms for children whose families could barely afford them, and crafting simple wedding dresses for young brides. She mentioned quietly that she had never owned a company, never accumulated riches, and never experienced the luxury of a ballroom like this one, but that she had successfully raised her children with honesty and love. She added, almost as an afterthought, that she had always made it a rule in her home to share whatever little food she had, ensuring that no neighbor or traveling stranger ever went hungry when they passed her door. Her words were completely devoid of boasting or a desire to impress, sounding instead like a simple account of a life spent in service to others. Michael Adams took a deep, emotional breath as Clara finished speaking, the silence in the ballroom now so profound that the distant sound of the ocean waves could be heard through the open windows. He turned back toward the wealthy crowd, his voice thick with a raw, earnest emotion that none of them had ever heard from the stoic billionaire before. He revealed to the astonished audience that his own beloved mother had also been a humble seamstress who worked herself to the bone, and that he had started his own life wearing clothes made from scraps of fabric she had saved. He stated with fierce conviction that if society had judged his mother solely by her cheap clothing or her lack of wealth, he would have been abandoned to poverty and would never have achieved the success that allowed him to stand before them today. He looked directly at the stunned faces of the socialites and declared that to judge a human being by the price of their garment was the ultimate sign of ignorance. The collective mood within the grand ballroom underwent a sudden, dramatic transformation as Michael's powerful words began to sink into the minds of the affluent guests. The superficial smiles vanished from their faces, replaced by expressions of sudden self-reproach, shame, and a deep, uncomfortable realization of their own arrogance. People who had previously sneered at Clara's faded brown coat now looked at her with a sudden, profound respect, seeing past the simple cotton dress to the magnificent, resilient soul of a woman who had spent a lifetime giving to the world. Hannah Davis felt the color completely drain from her face, her confident smile turning into a mask of pure embarrassment as she realized her cruel remarks had been completely exposed and condemned by the most powerful man in the room. Michael, however, was not yet finished with his defense of true merit and character, and he turned his attention toward Lily, who was standing beside her mother with tears streaming down her face. He called Lily forward, asking her to step into the center of the room and inquired aloud how long she had been an employee within the marketing and operations division of his corporate group. Lily cleared her throat and replied softly that she had been with the firm for 14 months, working quietly behind the scenes to support the executive teams. Michael then turned to several senior managers and corporate executives who were present at the party, asking them to provide a completely honest assessment of Lily's performance and her value to the organization. A senior director named David, a man known for his strict standards and years of loyalty to the company, stepped forward from the crowd without a moment's hesitation. David stated clearly into the room that Lily was one of the most exceptional young professionals he had ever encountered, possessing an extraordinary work ethic and a rare, selfless dedication to her team. He explained that whenever a project faced a crisis or a deadline was missed, Lily would quietly stay late into the night, working without any desire for public praise or extra recognition to ensure the team succeeded. Another colleague, a young designer named Beatrice, joined in, adding that Lily spent her free hours mentoring the new interns and helping others overcome their difficulties, never once complaining or seeking the spotlight for herself. Michael listened intently to the overwhelming praise from Lily's colleagues, his head nodding slowly as he confirmed what his own observations had already told him about the young woman's character. He looked out at the silent, wealthy crowd once more, his voice ringing out with an unshakable authority as he declared that individuals like Lily and her mother were the true backbone of any successful society. He stated firmly that while anyone with enough money could purchase an expensive silk dress or host a lavish event, true integrity, kindness, and genuine elegance could never be bought at any price. He told the audience that a person who lacks respect for the humble souls of this world is entirely devoid of true class, regardless of how much money they hold in their bank accounts. The heavy, prideful atmosphere that had dominated the grand ballroom since the early morning hours had completely dissipated, replaced by a quiet, reverent solemnity that felt almost sacred. No one dared to laugh, no one whispered gossip, and the superficial displays of wealth that had seemed so important an hour ago now felt completely meaningless and hollow. Clara, feeling overwhelmed by the massive shift in attention, tried to quietly steer the conversation away from herself, whispering to Michael that she was just an ordinary old woman who didn't need any special praise. But Michael merely smiled with profound warmth, gently declining to let her disappear into the background again, and instead did something that shocked the entire high society crowd of Charleston. With absolute grace, the billionaire chief executive officer reached over to a nearby table, pulled out a heavy cushioned chair, and placed it directly next to Clara with his own hands. He sat down beside the elderly seamstress, completely turning his back on the influential business leaders and politicians who were desperately waiting to speak with him, and dedicated his full attention to her. For nearly 30 minutes, Michael sat in deep, earnest conversation with Clara, asking her about the specific details of her life, the challenges she faced during the lean years, and the wisdom she had gathered along the way. Clara answered his questions with her natural, calm simplicity, speaking of the joy of watching a child grow and the peace that comes from a hard day's honest work, never once complaining about her hardships or attempting to make herself seem grand. As the wealthy guests watched this extraordinary interaction unfold, a deep sense of shame and reflection settled over the room, causing many to quietly reevaluate their own lives and priorities. They saw a man who commanded billions of dollars in assets treating a penniless old woman with the kind of deep respect usually reserved for royalty, and it shattered their fragile understanding of status. People began to realize that the wrinkles on Clara's face and the roughness of her hands were far more beautiful than the expensive jewelry worn by the socialites, because they represented a life spent entirely in love and sacrifice. The silent lesson was clear to everyone present. True greatness is found not in how many people serve you, but in how beautifully you have served others. When the lavish engagement party finally drew to a close and the guests began to quietly depart, Michael stood up, shook Clara's hand with immense gratitude, and then called Lily aside for a private conversation near the entrance. He looked at the young woman, whose eyes were still filled with a mixture of awe and residual emotion, and told her that he wanted to officially offer her a significant promotion within the company's corporate leadership team. He explained that this offer was not born out of pity or a desire to make a charitable gesture, but because he had recognized the unmistakable qualities of a true leader within her character. He stated that a person who possesses the integrity to remain humble in a corporate environment and who fiercely honors her roots is exactly the kind of leader his company needed to guide its future. Lily stood completely stunned by the sudden turn of events, her breath catching in her throat as she looked at the man who held the keys to her professional future. She asked him in a hesitant, emotional whisper why he was placing so much trust in someone as ordinary as her, given that there were many candidates with elite backgrounds and impressive resumes. Michael looked at her with a gentle, knowing smile and replied that an individual who has never forgotten where they came from is uniquely equipped to care for the people who are just arriving at the bottom. He told her that skills can be easily taught through training and experience, but the deep, internal capacity for empathy and unwavering respect is a rare treasure that cannot be manufactured. As Lily walked back to her mother, her heart overflowing with a profound gratitude and a renewed faith in the goodness of humanity, Clara looked at her with a proud, serene smile that seemed to illuminate her weathered face. But before they could exit the grand estate and step out into the warm afternoon sun, a shadow fell over their path as a familiar figure approached them from across the foyer. It was Hannah Davis, her head no longer held high with arrogant pride, her movements slow and hesitant as she stopped a few feet away from the elderly woman she had so terribly wronged. The crowd watched from a distance, expecting another confrontation, but the expression on Hannah's face was completely different from before. The mask of superficial perfection had cracked, revealing a deep and painful vulnerability beneath. Hannah stood before Clara and Lily for a long, agonizing moment, her hands clasped tightly together as she struggled to find the right words to speak after the public exposure of her cruelty. The arrogant confidence that had defined her entire life seemed to have completely vanished, replaced by a visible, trembling humility that made her look remarkably human for the first time that day. She lowered her head, looking directly into Clara's clear, calm eyes, and delivered an apology that was entirely devoid of theatrical performance or a desire to save her social reputation. She confessed in a broken whisper that she had spent so many decades trying to look important and build a flawless image for the world that she had completely forgotten how to look at real people with a clean heart. She admitted that her behavior had been deeply disgraceful, and she begged the elderly woman for a forgiveness that she knew she did not truly deserve. Lily watched Hannah closely, her defensive instincts fading as she saw the genuine sorrow and the deep, internal breaking that the wealthy woman was experiencing in that moment. Clara did not hesitate for a single second, nor did she allow a single drop of resentment or triumphant pride to mar her response to the woman who had publicly humiliated her. She reached out with her rough, calloused hand, gently touching Hannah's silk-clad arm, and replied in a soft, soothing voice that everyone in this life makes mistakes and loses their way at some point. Clara told her that the error itself is not what defines a person's life, but rather what they choose to do next with the truth they have discovered about themselves. Her immediate, unconditional forgiveness was a final, stunning display of grace that left Hannah entirely speechless, tears finally spilling over her cheeks as she realized the immense spiritual wealth of the woman she had called poor. Several months flew by following that unforgettable morning in the grand Charleston ballroom, and the profound ripples of that single event continued to transform the lives of everyone involved in unexpected ways. Lily officially stepped into her new corporate leadership role within the conglomerate, her promotion greeted with genuine joy and respect by her colleagues, David and Beatrice, who had long admired her silent dedication. She managed her new responsibilities with the same quiet dignity, empathy, and absolute fairness that she had learned from her mother, creating a workplace environment where every employee felt valued, regardless of their rank. Clara remained in her comfortable, modest home in the valley, still sewing clothes for her neighbors and pouring love into every stitch, her life completely unchanged by the sudden recognition she had received from the wealthy elite. But the most extraordinary and permanent transformation occurred in a place where no one would have ever expected to see it, within the daily life and soul of Hannah Davis. The deep embarrassment she suffered at the engagement party had acted as a powerful, necessary catalyst, shattering her lifelong obsession with high society vanity and forcing her to confront the emptiness of her material existence. She quietly stepped away from the superficial social circles that had once been her entire world, realizing that the flattery of wealthy acquaintances was nothing more than a hollow echo that could never offer true peace. She began to look at her community with new eyes, desperately seeking a way to rebuild her character from the ground up and make amends for the decades she had spent living in selfish arrogance. Guided by a new friend named Nancy, a dedicated and compassionate coordinator at a local community center, Hannah began volunteering her time at a humble shelter in the working-class districts of the city. She traded her expensive silk gowns for plain denim and sneakers, spending her mornings chopping vegetables in a hot kitchen and serving warm meals to families who had fallen on incredibly hard times. She did not bring a photographer, she never posted about her charity work on social media, and she completely refused to use her wealth to buy a position of authority within the shelter. Instead, she chose to work in absolute silence, learning the names of the people she served, listening to their stories of struggle, and slowly relearning the foundational human values she had discarded so long ago. Through this grueling, beautiful work, Hannah discovered a profound, lasting joy that her millions of dollars and perfect social standing had never been able to provide. As the seasons turned and the warm summer air of South Carolina gently gave way to the crisp, golden breezes of autumn, Hannah found her thoughts frequently returning to the elderly seamstress. She realized that the rough hands and simple floral dress of Clara had taught her more about true elegance and human worth than a lifetime spent in the company of millionaires and celebrities. She learned that a person's true importance is never found in the prestige of the venue they occupy, or the expensive labels stitched into the fabric of their clothing, but in the depth of their capacity to love and respect their fellow human beings. The memory of that morning in the ballroom became a sacred anchor for her, a permanent reminder that the most ordinary souls in our world are often the ones carrying the greatest light. The journey of life is a long, winding road that eventually strips away all the temporary illusions of youth, wealth, and social standing, leaving behind only the true essence of who we are. For those who have lived through many decades and watched the world change around them, there comes a profound understanding that the external trappings of success are incredibly fragile and entirely fleeting. A beautiful house can crumble, a vast fortune can vanish in a moment of economic turmoil, and the flawless physical appearance we guard so fiercely will inevitably fade under the gentle, unyielding march of time. When we reach the later chapters of our earthly journey, the grand titles we accumulated and the social hierarchies we fought so hard to climb begin to look like distant, meaningless games played by children who did not know any better. We begin to see with absolute clarity that the only wealth we truly take with us, and the only legacy that leaves a permanent mark upon the fabric of reality, is the love we gave away and the respect we offered to others. True elegance is never an external display that can be purchased in a luxury boutique or demonstrated through the loud boastings of social prominence and exclusive invitations. It is a quiet, beautiful state of the soul, an internal sanctuary constructed from the raw materials of humility, kindness, patience, and an unwavering reverence for the inherent dignity of every human life. A person who possesses this genuine inner wealth can walk into the grandest palace or the most impoverished cottage and their behavior will remain exactly the same: polite, gentle, and entirely free from the poison of arrogance. They do not need to look down upon another human being to feel large, nor do they need the applause of a crowd to know that their existence has profound meaning and value. Like the simple floral dress worn by a mother who sacrificed everything for her child, true dignity shines brightest when it is completely unadorned, radiating a pure, natural light that exposes the hollow vanity of those who value appearance over substance. We live in a world that is often desperately sick with the pursuit of superficial perfections, a society that foolishly encourages people to judge a book by its cover and a man by the balance of his bank account. We are constantly bombarded with the false narrative that we must constantly outshine our neighbors, climb higher than our peers, and exclude those who do not fit into our curated circles of success. But the grand design of human destiny has a magnificent, poetic way of correcting these errors, often using the simplest and most overlooked individuals to deliver the most profound lessons to the proud. When we choose to humiliate or ignore a gentle soul simply because their clothes are cheap or their background is humble, we are not actually diminishing their worth. We are merely revealing the deep poverty of our own spirits. Every human encounter is a sacred mirror reflecting the true condition of our hearts, and the way we treat the most vulnerable among us is the ultimate measure of our spiritual maturity. As we look back on the long tapestry of our experiences, let us remember that the most beautiful hands are not those that have remained soft and untouched by the burdens of labor, but those that are calloused from lifting others up. Let us honor the quiet, hard-working mothers and fathers who spent their lifetimes in the shadows, sewing the garments of our future with the invisible threads of unconditional love and endless sacrifice. Let us strive to build a life where respect is offered freely to every soul we meet, regardless of their garment, their title, or the place they occupy in the social order of our passing world. For in the end, when the music of the ballroom stops and the lights of the grand chandeliers finally grow dim, we will all stand equal before the universe, judged only by the depth of our kindness and the purity of our love. Let us live in such a way that our legacy is found not in the riches we kept for ourselves, but in the hearts we comforted, the dignity we defended, and the gentle grace we left behind.